Hey everyone, welcome to the latest edition of Client Horror Stories. And I'm very excited to jump right into today's story with Stephanie Schwab. Stephanie, good to chat again.
Hey Morgan, so good to see you.
Yeah, it's been a while since our course, but so you just gave me a little sneak peek of the story, and I'm so excited to hear it. I'm already getting shivers for what's going to happen. Let's jump right in. What's the background, and tell us the story.
Great. So yeah, well, not so great. This
Not
is a
so
story.
great story.
Yeah, not so great story. This is a story that is about managing clients and also managing partners. And so I run a marketing agency. We're 11 years old, digital marketing. We've been virtual our entire lives. So COVID was kind of like
Before it was cool.
Yeah, before it was cool, right? We've been using Zoom like since the very beginning. And we, maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago, probably about 8 years ago, I was, we were in a period of growth, and I was doing a fair amount of networking in person. I was living in New York at the time, and I was doing networking locally in New York. And I met this agency, an agency owner, who did complementary stuff. So we did social media and content marketing and influence marketing, and they did web design and some content strategy, but they didn't really have like writers or content creators on staff. And so they brought us. So, I meet the guy, and he's a nice guy, and we're like, yeah, let's stay in touch. And like 3 weeks later, he comes to me and says, I've got this project.
So 3 weeks after you met him, so you didn't know him that well.
Yeah. 3 weeks after I met him, right? I just met him once at a networking event. Okay. But we, exchanged cards. We might have even had like a 15-minute phone call after that. But we weren't close by any means. I didn't really know much about him.
Right.
And so 3 weeks after I met him, he brought me this project, and he said, hey, I want to pitch this company. This is it's a global brand, right? Which for me, I'm a relatively small marketing agency. We were sub $500,000 a year at the time. And so I was really excited about the potential to pitch this global brand. And so he's like, yeah, we're going to bring you in as a partner. We can do the web stuff. You can do the social stuff. It's a match made in heaven. Like, let's go. And I was like, awesome.
Step back. I don't know where the story is going. I just know it's going to be a horror story. At this point, were there any yellow or red flags that in retrospect you should have realized, but you didn't see at the time?
Not yet. And even in retrospect, like at that point, no, I don't think that there were.
Although I will point out, knowing nothing other than what you've told me, just meeting someone and saying, oh, I have a client for you is already a bit weird, because anyone who's actually confident and good and more than 22 years old probably knows a whole bunch of people and a whole bunch of networks. So why are you going to someone you just met?
Yeah. So, okay. Now with your perspective, I think you're probably right. At the same time, though, like we hit it off.
You hit it off, right?
It was some time ago when there weren't that many people that deep into what I did.
That's true. But back then, now there's a whole generation of people that only do social media.
Totally.
But
totally.
You're such a trendsetter.
Yeah, I've been working in it since the very beginning, so for a long time. So,
okay.
So I kind of get where he was coming from. Like for him, he probably hadn't met that many agencies.
That many makes sense.
Right?
Makes sense.
And at that time, I'd already had 10 years of experience. So this is 8 or so years ago. I'd already had 8 or 10 years of experience, which was very unusual at the time. Very, very unusual.
Okay, so, interesting.
And I had big name clients on my roster mostly from the agencies I'd worked at previous, but he was able to bring those big name clients to this big name client.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
I see from his point of view, why it was really valuable. Yeah. And for me, it was like, oh my God, although I'd had big name clients at my previous agencies, in my own agency at that point, I hadn't.
Okay. So it's so exciting.
So exciting.
Sounds great.
And company was in Manhattan, easy to get. Like a lot of my clients were already by then virtual, and I had never met them. And I was like, oh my God, I get to go into an office and pitch this client. That's super cool. So that was kind of fun too.
Okay, great. So then what happened?
So we go, we pitch, and I had a lot of joint ventures by then. Like, in the first few years of my agency, that's like the PR people that I knew were bringing me a lot of business, and I would jointly pitch with people. But those were people I'd known for a long time, mostly. Like we had relationships, and especially as I was just starting out, if they saw an opportunity to help me out and bring me in, they did. And of course, I did the reverse. So I had done a lot of joint pitches. But this one was a little different because this agency wanted to be the lead agency, and they wanted me to have all of my billing through them. Like they had a relationship with this company previously, which I think I knew that they had they had done some work before. They were already set up in their super complicated global procurement system.
Yes.
And so they were like, well, instead of getting you set up, it'll be faster and easier. You bill us, and we'll bill the client.
I see. So in your previous joint ventures, you bill the client directly without this third person in the middle.
Yes.
I also want to point out, not knowing where the story is going, procurement in big companies is a total nightmare. So it also makes sense why you would agree to that. You're like, oh my God, months of paperwork just to get authorization before we could start. So makes it quick and easy. Okay.
We were small at the time, I didn't really have somebody to devote to that effort. I just went through a big procurement process with another client. And so it was weeks and weeks and weeks of somebody nagging on it, So so at the time I could have, but it would have been hard to do that. So he was like, yeah, we're just going to slide you in. You're going to bill us. We're going to bill them, all smooth. And it made sense at the time. But in hindsight, that was one of the first red flags, right? Was I have learned, I don't ever want to be not the lead agency. That I always want to be the primary agency or the direct agency, even if I'm going in partnership with somebody. I want to have my own billing. I want to have my own client contacts, which I did, but I want to have a direct relationship because I've now been burned, and that wasn't the only time. I mean, other smaller things happened, before and since. So now, 11 years into owning my business, I feel completely, utterly confident in being the lead agency, which of course 8 or so years ago I was not. So that's part of the difference.
Confidence matters.
Yeah.
Okay, so that yellow flag. So you agreed to go in under his umbrella.
Yeah. So now we are contracted with this big company, and they actually have somebody, which turns out not in Manhattan. I didn't really realize this up front, but they have somebody not in Manhattan. This person's sitting elsewhere in another state, and they are the lead person, and they're not actually an employee of the company, it turns out. They're working with this auxiliary part of the company that we're working with as a contractor.
So you're basically, your contact that you're working with is another outside contractor.
Yes. Who's embedded in the company full-time, but not an employee, doesn't hold a business card from there. And they're managing this important initiative, very important initiative from this company, which is what we've been contracted for.
That's another yellow flag as well.
Yes. And at the time that was immediately, whereas the procurement thing and the billing thing didn't raise a red flag originally, that right away was a yellow flag where I was like, wait a minute. So yes, I had to go into Manhattan a few times here and there, and occasionally he'd come from where he was and meet us in Manhattan, and that was good. But suddenly I wasn't really working for the company directly. I was working for this guy who was amassing the resources to get this initiative going.
Right. And I'll point out part of the risk here, in case anyone watching this doesn't realize why it's risky, is this inevitably creates it's like the children's game of telephone. So you report to the agency you're working with, who's reporting to another outside contractor, who's reporting to some lower level person agency, who's reporting to the higher level person. There's already 5 levels until it actually reaches the decision maker. And the telephone has to break somewhere.
Absolutely. That wire is getting thinner and thinner with every single person that gets added to the mix, right?
Totally.
So, and then there's a lot of misconnections, right? There's a lot of dropped calls where, my partner, the lead agency, talks to this guy and doesn't loop me in, or this guy talks to the client and goes back to the partner, right? Like, so I'm only moderately in part of this conversation for some of it, right? So some of it I'm in the thick of it, but for some of it I'm like only hearing stuff second or third. So, you know, right off the bat, like as we start working, like this is clearly like not an ideal situation. So, but miraculously, we get the website off the ground, we get all the copy written, we get everything going that this other agency is primarily delivering. And we were very involved in it, and you know, it looked gorgeous and it worked really well, and it accomplished all of our objectives. So that was fantastic. And now my team is contracted for social media, influence marketing, blogging, content marketing. So
back then it wasn't even called influencer marketing, or you're like one of the first.
Yeah, we were working with bloggers. That's what it was. Exactly. We were working with bloggers, right? We had to get bloggers.
It's funny how now, like back then it was just, oh yeah, I'm going to work with some bloggers, but now there's like a whole title industry category around that.
Yeah, now they're creators. We've even taken it one step further, right? They were bloggers, then they were influencers. Now they are creators, and now we work with creators. So yeah, it's definitely evolved.
As a side note, just because I'm having a fun virtual coffee, it's funny how. And when you watch old TV, when people try to write or create TV shows or movies now in an old style, you can always tell if it's not from the time, because people use modern vocabularies for things that didn't exist then. So someone in 20 years is gonna do something about in 2000 and we're influencer marketing. Well, people like us will be like, wait a minute, that did exist, but it wasn't called that.
It was for many more years. We called it blogger relations. So yes, it was a totally different thing.
Totally. Okay. Yeah. So game of broken telephone, it's going to break. These meetings started happening with where certain people weren't looped in. Then what happened?
Yeah. So, you know, while the website's being built, and that's a process, you know, that's taken a few months. I can't remember exactly what it was. But while that's happening, you know, our team is setting up you know, what is a social media brand voice, and you know, how do we sound, and you know, this is an initiative that is starting from scratch for this company. So we're like laying all the groundwork for all that. We are interviewing bloggers to get engaged with the brand and getting them set up to start going once the website is launched and the whole initiative launch happens. And you know, we're creating blog content so that it's ready to go and getting ahead of our editorial calendar. Like, we're doing all this normal agency stuff, and that part of it was like totally like, we know this, we can do this. It was awesome. It worked really well. Sorry, it was my alarm. It worked really well. So, you know, everything was tight, and we felt really good going into the launch. Okay. So the launch happens, big fanfare, company's excited, everybody's excited. Like you know, everybody's happy with what's going on. I noticed at that moment that we're like, the client doesn't see that we, Crackerjack Marketing, are doing anything, right? The kudos are going to the lead agency. And so like, we're just one more email name on the distribution list. And, you know, so right off the bat, I see like, oh, wait, the client really doesn't know who we are. I mean, they do, but they don't.
Right.
And, you know, so that was sort of another like fairly early red flag where I was like, yeah, I'm not crazy about this arrangement. But it seemed to be going okay. And the bottom line was we had this amazing launch that we could now talk about and use as a case study, and that was great. But now the real work begins. And so now for us, now we're really in the thick of it, and we're the day-to-day agency, even though we're not the lead agency. Now suddenly the rest, you know, so the first 3 or 4 months or whatever the website took really did belong to the lead agency.
I see.
But now tides have shifted.
I see. So for the first few months, you had to do content and marketing, and they're building the site. But after the launch, the site's already built. So it's all just you.
Right. Here we are, and now it's all us. And so now we're realizing they were too busy when they were working on the website to really get engaged in what we were working on. And then we were delivering and showing to the client, and the client was approving, you know, all of our pre-launch communication so that we could be ready for launch. And then after the launch, now suddenly they have time on their hands and they want to continue to be the lead agency. And so now they're starting to insert themselves in our processes and in our content in a way that we did not expect and we did not need. And they're not experts. And so they, that was again like a friction point.
That was a friction point. Question. At this point, or is still not knowing where the story is going, do you understand how their billing worked? Like, were they marking up your time? Like, were they just being paid, a retainer, so they had extra hours that they needed to kill, or was all that invisible to you?
My understanding, although it was somewhat invisible, but I mean, I didn't have the full picture, right. But my understanding was we billed them X amount as a retainer per month, yes. Which included the pre-launch months of creating the launch content and afterwards. So we were billing them. I think we had a startup fee and then some, for the launch and then some monthly retainer. My understanding was that they were doing something similar. They were charging them a fee for the website plus a monthly retainer. And they did have hours of their own built into that monthly retainer. So it wasn't like they didn't have any hours.
Right. So basically they had to continue getting their fee. They had to justify doing something. So they're trying to make themselves useful and important.
Exactly. Though had I done this, right. I would have not made any of that transparent to the client, right? The client would have had X amount for the fee, here is the, $20,000 a month fee or whatever it was. And they wouldn't have known how much was me versus the other agency.
So in the way it was set up, the client knew that it was this much for.
No, I don't know. I don't know that. I don't know. But if that were the case, and they were trying to justify, like, why would they do that? That would not be how I would have done it.
I see.
So I don't know where it was coming from that they were like kind of desperate to stay engaged. But of course, they wanted more work from the client. They wanted to stay visible and front and center to the client. Which I would have done the same. I would have wanted to be visible as well.
Makes sense.
So we run this project pretty well for 6 months, 9 months, maybe even a year. Like it was like a 18-month initiative. I think it was a side initiative from the company that they on a particular, it was a cause thing. So they wanted to market this cause. And so we're running it and ran it pretty well. And for the most part, it was pretty smooth up until we get farther and farther behind in payments from the lead agency. So at first they were just slow pay, right? Like we'd invoice them on the 1st of the month with payment net 30, and we'd get it on the 35th day or the 40th day. And like, okay, cash flow wise, it's not ideal, but if I know that, I can manage it.
Right.
So for the first few months after launch, maybe that's how it was, 6 months, maybe. And then they start to get further and further and further behind. And so now I'm going to the lead agency and saying like, what gives? I mean, I had been doing that somewhat along the way, but now I'm really like, what gives? We can't continue to work like this. I can't afford to, I have costs and staff and all this devoted to this, right? So I'm frustrated, and he's like, yeah, the client is slow to pay. So I can only pay you when the client pays you, when the client pays me. Okay, like I'll buy that, right? Big company, global company, lots going on. I understand that. But I'm starting to feel insecure about how much delayed the payments are coming. Right. And then every now and then I'll get 2 months of payment at once, like he'll be 2 months behind and I'll get both of them at once. Again, like it could be like I've had big companies pay me. It could be that. But I have the feeling that this guy is having cash flow problems and he is holding on to my payments to fix his cash flow problems. So
two comments on that. One, I've personally started putting into my standard contract and invoice template that if it's past net 30, there's like a 5% monthly fine So like, and guess what? Any late that solved late payment problems completely. So second thought is a question. When you started suspecting he's having cash flow problems, did you ask him directly about that, or
I didn't really. I mean, I more was trying to protect my own turf
Mm.
in saying like, I just can't keep doing this.
Right.
But I did not confront him to say like, what gives? Like, is this like, you tell me like what's going on here? And at that point, I get this contractor involved, maybe when we're getting to be like 45 days, 60 days past payment, I went to this contractor who's running the project, this other guy who's representing the company, and say to him, like, I don't know if you realize what's happening, but I am now out, 45 or 60 days on my payments. I am going to give all of you a deadline by which we have to get whole. Otherwise, we can no longer do work. And so this guy says, okay, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And so we do that. And
Wait, so did he confirm that the company had been late in paying your agency client, the big agency?
he didn't know. I mean, he couldn't. But he was my day-to-day client,
He was your day-to-day.
So,
Yes.
but I also had no direct channel to accounting
big-
at the company,
Right.
To be able to even try to investigate what was going on there, and really no say in that matter.
No say, yeah.
So, like I couldn't march up to their accounting office and say virtually and say like, hey, what gives? I haven't gotten paid, because it had nothing to do with them. It only had to do with this other agency.
Ooh, yeah. This is where the game of telephone is becoming really painful.
Yes, exactly. And just my lack of connection, right? That I'm removed. I'm like, on the shoulder of this other agency, and I'm not really in the thick of it. And that's a problem. So I say to my client, to this agency, to this contractor, like, okay, so if we're not paid, if we're not caught up with the 2 months of payment that are past due, I think we were about 2 months past due at that time, we're going to give you 15 days. We're going to give this other agency 15 days to get whole. And then we're going to stop work. Well, so of course, the other agency pays us one of the 2 months.
Right.
And says, yeah, don't stop work. Right. We really like keep going. We can't afford to piss this client off. This initiative is going to run for another 6 more months. Like, please don't stop work. Here's 1 month, 1 month to tide you over. And I'm like, okay.
That's also like, it's the worst outcome. Like when they give you everything, go. If they give you nothing, it's over. But, here's some, it gives you just enough hope.
Right. It's the breadcrumbs, right? I'm just going to lay some breadcrumbs out for you on the table. And
yes.
Live on crumbs for a little while. It will be okay. So yes, we were like Cinderella at that moment. We didn't have the ball gown, we only had like the glimmer of it. So we continued to do work, and then like they were constantly like, we were still like 1 month hanging out there that was not paid, but they were like 15, 30 days late, but they were paying us monthly. But there was still like at least a month outstanding all the time, if not at some point too. And every time I would raise concern, and start to say, here's the new date, we're going to stop working, suddenly, miraculously, some money would get thrown at us and we would keep working.
Quite a coincidence.
Yes. So somewhere in there, I don't know where we were, but we were getting some money and it didn't feel like a total loss. And this contractor calls me up one day and says, I need to have a really frank conversation with you. I'm like, oh shit. Anytime a client calls up and says that, like, I don't know about you, Morgan, but for me, like, it goes into my stomach, right? Like, oh my God.
It's by the way, even when the clients are really happy and things are going great, like a one sentence email, hey, let's talk. Like,
oh my God.
You think the world is ending.
It's all going to crash down, right? Like, and it's, it's some imposter syndrome, like, oh my God, I'm not good enough. Like, what's wrong? And,
totally.
And what have we done wrong? And I know, what are they angry about? And you're right. It's not always that they're angry.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But after, almost 30 years, because I've been doing this as long, maybe not, 25 years of working for clients, like I still have that pit in my stomach when I do get that text or that email, like.
Wait, 25 years of working with clients. So you started client work when you were 5 years old.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
You're
Absolutely.
so precocious.
Yeah. No, I really, gosh, oh my God. I have been working with clients now for 25 years. That's insane. That's insane. Wow. Yeah. So, so I have lots more of these horror stories.
Lots more stories. So the subcontractor calls up, says we need to talk. You get the call in your pit in your stomach feeling, and then you have the call in. What happens?
Right. We have the call and he's like, I got to tell you, I see that you're having problems with this other agency and I hate them.
Ooh.
And I'm like, okay, what do I do with this information? Like, so I'm trying to, I don't want to throw them under the bus and be too negative about them. But of course, I'm being burned by them right now.
Yeah.
And I don't understand what value they're bringing. Like, needless to say, this whole time they've been putting their nose in the middle of my business and they really have no value right now. Like I am running everything and they're just sort of riding alongside it, picking up a fee. And so I'm resentful. I am angry. I am not getting paid. So I'm even more angry, right? This is not a great relationship for me. And suddenly the client calls or the client's person calls and says, yeah, I hate them. I don't like them either. And I'm like, oh my God, now what? So that was really a tough conversation because I kind of had to be like, oh yeah, well, I think they're really bringing value to the table. Like I was very tentative about it because I didn't know how to position my feelings about them to this guy. I didn't want to be like the disgruntled partner,
Question. I don't know how the story turns out, but a decade later of not just experience, but of life agency experience in general, would you have managed that? Had you had that conversation today, would you have taken a different approach?
Yes. I would have been transparent and direct.
By the way, I'm happy to hear that because my instinct is even though we don't want to throw people under the bus, there are cases like this where they are messing up, they are hurting you, the client, and you've tried to solve it in so many ways, and there's nothing else to do other than shine light on it and make it transparent.
Yes. Well, and so eventually I did that with the client. Like eventually I did tell the client exactly what was going on. I opened my kimono, told them everything that was going on. The client knew that the payments were late, but I also eventually, like maybe 6 weeks after that first conversation, went to him. But it took me some time to sort of politically understand, like, is this the right thing? Is this the wrong thing? Like, what's he really thinking? What is his solution? Does he have a solution in mind? Because I knew what my solution was, which was I take it over, we kick out this other agency, I go through the procurement process, and we move forward with this initiative. Like that would have been my ideal. Yes. But the client, the client proxy is like, so I dance with him a little bit, like, oh, well, they were so instrumental in this setup and, getting our brand look and feel. And it's great to have them involved in vetting the images that we're putting up on the blog, like, I'm like,
exactly,
trying hard to figure out like where his issues are and like, where do I want to stand? So we danced like that actually for about 6 weeks. And at the end of the 6 weeks, I did come more direct. I was much more direct with him. And I was like, this is really my ideal. I'd much rather go straight to the client and have a relationship with the client and not work with this agency.
Right.
But the client guy is not really the client. The client guy is a contractor and can't really call up and say, hey, we're making a switch here and we want Crackerjack to be the agency. And we're going to let go of this other agency. He's also dancing a fine dance, fine line dance. And the initiative is kind of coming to an end, but it could continue. We don't really know. Like the initial contract of the initiative is supposed to end in 6 months, but this client proxy wants it to go on and on and on. He thinks it's a really valuable initiative for the company and thinks that it could get renewed. And of course, he wants it to get renewed because that's what he's attached to.
Exactly. He's making money.
Yes. So this is like, again, like, because our client wasn't internal, like in hindsight, nobody on this project had the best interest of the company at heart, because we didn't really have a client champion on the company side. And so we were all looking out for ourselves.
So I think this is a good lesson from this story on the other side, that anything a client does, you always need the internal client champion to be on top of it. And it makes a difference about like internal is technically internal as compared to practically internal.
Right. Absolutely. And since then, we have not done another project like that. Like we have always worked directly for the client. We've often had other agencies that we've worked with, or even a contractor that runs the client project, but we've always had, in fact, I had another horror story that happened we were contracted with the client, and the outside contractor also became hated by the client, but they were only a contractor and they got let go. So that one worked out for us.
We can have another episode another day with the other story.
Yeah.
So this story. So after the 6 weeks, you became clear. None of the three of you really like had the best interest of the client in mind. There is no internal champion. So it was this messy situation. And what happened?
Yes. So we really tried to convince this contractor that we should go directly to the client. And he really wanted this other agency, the lead agency, out. He was getting super frustrated with it. He was pissed that they weren't paying us because he knew that put him in jeopardy, right? Yes. If we pulled out, he would look terrible.
Yes.
You know, if all of a sudden social went dark on this whole initiative, all these handles that were being populated every day and all these bloggers that were writing about this initiative, like that would make him look like shit. So he was in a terrible position. We were in a terrible position, and he was getting increasingly more and more angry with this other agency. And so over like the 6 weeks or whatever it was before I really went to him and said, I got to tell you, I'm also so angry. And then we kind of had a meeting of the minds. Like we both were really honest with each other about it. And that was great.
Right.
But we were powerless. We couldn't do anything about it. And so ultimately, we went along for another 2 months, maybe 3 months, where we were constantly behind. They still owed us 2 months of payment. We had a new deadline every 4 weeks of like when we're going to stop working, and some money would come our way. Not all, not even the whole month. Sometimes they would just throw us like half of a month's retainer. And it was super clear to us at that point now that they couldn't afford to pay us. And so we kept going maybe for another couple of months, but we did not get to the end of this agreement because we did eventually have to pull out and just stop servicing the client. And, you know, in the end, because of that, I mean, we knew we were going to lose money. There was no question that we were going to lose money. And it was a question of, do we lose money while continuing to service a client and we're more and more and more in the hole? Or do we cut our losses now and get out? And so in the end, that's what we did. We cut our losses and we got out and we quit. And it was certainly not my finest moment. It was one of the hardest decisions that I've ever made, and one that I feel professionally like I was not at my professional best by any means. But we were like some $30,000 or $40,000 in the hole by then. And I never recovered that money.
So question, why do you think you weren't at your professional best at that point? Like, it sounds reasonable. Like a client doesn't pay you for a long time, like you quit. So,
it wasn't the client that wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't
professional.
It wasn't the client that wasn't paying me. Had the client not paid me, and I could have gone to the client, the company, the big global company, and said, "You guys are screwing me over. But I can't work for you."
But for practical purposes, your client was this middleman agency. So
yes.
So we'll differentiate between your client was this agency, the end client is the big global company.
Right.
So you are acting very professionally in regards to your client. Your client doesn't pay you, and you give him ample opportunity and ample warning. Too much, in fact.
Way too much.
way too much. So it's
still a feeling of, oh my God, I have this big global client on my roster. I'm so proud to be working with them, and I am walking away and screwing them. Right? Even if they aren't fully aware of it, like they're not blaming me. They're actually not blaming me. They're blaming this other agency, right? But, and the contractor, they're also blaming the contractor. Like it was not good for the contractor. But I still had this knot in my stomach about like, I will never go work for this company again because I screwed them over, which you're right. I didn't really screw them over, right? I got screwed over by their lead agency that they hired. But it's still this feeling of like, I hate to walk away. I hate to not do a great job. I hate to not, fulfill all of my obligations professionally or of course, personally too. But like, I still had this real feeling of inadequacy around it. But I did everything, like you said, too much to try to fix it.
I think a fact that a lot of people don't appreciate is that often the difference between a good professional, a great professional is great professionals often don't do it for the money. Like you want to do a good job. Like there's this pride in creating, this pride in ownership. So even when you're being screwed over and are $40,000 in the hole, you want to keep on doing a great job, and you want to be the good guy. Good girl.
And we were working with bloggers who were really committed to the project, and we were paying them. I mean, we had not only my team's costs, but we had their costs also that we were covering. Right. So but we had relationships with these bloggers, long-standing relationships that we wanted to keep those relationships active. And, so there was a lot sort of caught up with this project that went directly to our professional credibility. Yes. And so, and to me, credibility is delivering. And so we wanted to get, and I should mention, I really believed in the initiative, right? I thought the initiative was really, really important for the world. Right. And so, like that was also weighing on me, like, wait, if this goes dark, this message is not getting out there into the world. And I think it's a really good message, and I want to see it succeed. So there was some of that too. So yeah, it was a really tough thing to walk away.
So after you walked away, did you hear how it turned out? Did everything just go dark? Like is there what's it called after a story where there's like an addendum?
Oh,
Epilogue. I can't believe I forgot the word epilogue. You're not the only one getting old here. I am too. Is there an epilogue for what happened after you pulled out?
Yeah, well, the epilogue is that we tried to recover the money, and got lawyers involved and collections involved, and went through that process. And they kept saying, we don't have the money. We're cash poor. We can't pay you. And I looked into suing them, and because the guy's personal finances were of course commingled with his company finances, which is another client horror story or agency horror story to be aware of. So I could have sued him, and ultimately realized that it was going to cost me as much money to sue him as I would have recovered, and so it wasn't worth doing. But it took a while, and it certainly took me off other stuff while I was dealing with how do I recover this money. And there was just a lot of time and effort spent in trying to get that money recovered, that like ultimately I was a waste because I couldn't get any of it. So yeah, the epilogue is, it took us a year really to climb out of that hole, because we now had a loss on our balance sheet from that client, and had to make up that loss. So we did it no problem eventually. But the that first year was pretty rough because we were skating really close to the line on our finances.
Makes sense. To wrap up, any other lessons or things you would have done differently that now you realize in hindsight? We mentioned a whole bunch during the conversation. Any others that you realize now or want to share?
Yeah, I think really it's hard as a new agency, or a smaller agency. We were 3 years into business, maybe at that time, 4 years. It's hard when you are starting out to be confident that you can lead a project like this. And so the instinct is to go with the flow. My instinct was, and I think it's true of others that I've spoken to, right? The instinct is to go with the flow, to get that big name and do what you need to do and get, notch those wins on the board. But I think that if you have delivered good work to bigger companies, of course, if you've never worked for a bigger company, that's another story. But if you've delivered good work to bigger companies, even at a previous agency, even at a previous gig, you should, like, I would say to any other agency owner, like, feel confident in like going for what you want, right? That you want to be directly contracted, even if it takes you a bunch of time to get it figured out. Like, don't compromise your agency integrity to get that client. Because that's what we did. We compromised our own agency integrity in a way, in many ways, actually, by being willing to go in on this kind of, less than certain scheme. And the other thing related to that is know your partners.
Yes.
Know your partners. And don't get into bed with somebody that you don't know really, really, really well.
That makes sense. Question. In retrospect, during the course of the problems with the middleman agency over these months when he wasn't paying, is there anything that you think you should have done differently? For example, maybe you should have pulled out earlier, or
yes. Yeah, we should have pulled out earlier for sure. We should have set a firm deadline and stuck to it and said, like, nope, the payment has to be in full, otherwise we're quitting. And not taken the scraps that he was laying on the table of like, oh, we'll give you this partial payment. I also should have gotten an attorney involved much earlier.
Ooh.
So just a simple lawyer, which would have cost me a couple $100s of my attorney's time, would have possibly netted me more income coming in from that agency, or would have encouraged me to quit earlier.
It's funny. You, as someone running an agency, you always tell clients, you need to hire us because we're the professionals. We know exactly what to do. And it's the same thing. You to a lawyer, you have a problem with a client. They're not paying you. It's the lawyer that specializes in this, who's seen it 100 times. He knows exactly the letter to write and what to say and do, or tell you how it's likely to turn out to make it easier for you.
Yeah, well, and as an agency owner, I am afraid of lawyers a little bit because I'm afraid of the billing, right? I'm afraid that it's going to rack up. I've gone through a trademark issue where like the bills just piled up and piled up and piled up. So like, it's terrifying to be like, I'm going to call my lawyer, because then you're like, how much is that going to cost me? Oh my God, right? But in this case, in retrospect, and now I've gone through a couple, not the same, but related kinds of things, where my lawyer can spend like an hour or two and they can tell me up front, like, I just need to draft this one letter. It's going to take us 2 hours. Here's the cost of it, right? Unless it goes further, that we can control these costs. And now I know enough about lawyers to know that. But at the time, I didn't know that really either. And so that's also a good, I think, lesson learned for agency owners is like, have a good lawyer that's going to be straight with you, that you can really go to with these problems. And, and they're going to get on the phone with you for free, for sure. If they're a good lawyer, they will. And, at least assess the problem and then ask them up front, like, how much is this going to cost me? And don't be afraid of asking that.
Great advice, all. And I think these are wonderful lessons. Thank you for sharing it. And I wish it were easier to be able to do awesome stuff without first having gone through painful experiences, but
that's this life, right? That's we live and learn, and every opportunity is a growing experience, and it's what makes us good at what we do, for sure.
Great. This has been super fun. And I think we should schedule another one in a few months with the other story you hinted at. I can't resist stories like this.
I'd love that. And it's always fun to talk to you, Morgan. So good to see you.
It was fun. Thank you.
Thanks so much.